Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he's ready to work under Trump's strong leadership and sign a minerals deal after the US suspends military aid to Kyiv. Europe says it's ready to step up as it presents an €800 billion plan to rearm and boost defence spending. And stock markets tumble as fresh American tariffs fuel trade war fears. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says this is a very dumb thing to do. Our top story this evening. In the last hour, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has released a statement saying he would like to reiterate Ukraine's commitment to peace. It comes after President Trump suspended US military aid to Kyiv. In the statement, he said, Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts. Our meeting in Washington at the White House on Friday did not go the way it was supposed to be. It is regrettable that it happened this way. It is time to make things right. I'm now joined by Ukrainian MP Oleksii Goncharenko. Oleksii, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate you having you on the show. In the last hour, Zelenskyy has posted on social media. What do you make of your president's words, which pretty much fell short of an apology to the Trump administration?
I think that is a good move, and this is a good statement. He agrees that the meeting, it was regrettable what had happened on Friday. That's already good. And Ukraine needs the United States as our ally, and we want to have peace. I think this is right messages, and I hope these messages will be heard by American side.
Absolutely. We haven't heard from Donald Trump yet, but I'm sure we will. Zelenskyy says regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it in any time and in any convenient format. Zelenskyy is willing to go back to the negotiating table, but is he the right person to make the right deal for Ukraine following that Oval Office disagreement?
We don't have any other person. He is the president of Ukraine, and he will be the president till the end of the war. Because according to Ukrainian law, and just physically, elections are impossible today in Ukraine. So president of Ukraine can't be changed, and we will have elections after the end of the war. So this war we will end under leadership of President Zelenskyy. So he will be in charge of these negotiations. That is something which is absolutely clear. So I think, I hope he made lessons from what had happened during last days. And I want just to reiterate once again, Ukraine needs peace as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that lengthy social media statement that we saw from Zelenskyy, he actually outlined some substance of what he wants when it comes to bringing peace into Ukraine. He says, we're ready to work fast to end the war, and the first stages could be the release of prisoners and truce in the skies. He does go on. Is this the correct way to go about things?
I think this is a good start. If we will have a truce in sky, in waters, meaning that there will be no long-range attacks, both from Ukrainian and Russian side, that can be a good start. And to see how Russia, in reality, is ready for peace.
Do you think Russia will be willing to follow this?
I think Russia doesn't want peace, but Russia is afraid of the United States. They fear United States, and because of this fear, they will go to negotiation table. Last days, they were absolutely happy. The happiest person on earth on Friday was Putin, when he saw what had happened in the White House. But it's time finally to make him upset and make him go to table where the real peace will be established.
Do you think enough has been done by other countries to help Ukraine at the moment, Oleksii?
I want to thank all countries who support Ukraine in any way, politically, economically, militarily, first of all. All support is very much needed. And again, we heard a lot of statements from European leaders of support to Ukraine. But just one thing we should always remember, that you can't intercept Russian missile with a statement. You can't destroy Russian tank with a social media post. So we need concrete support, and I hope it will come.
Yes, absolutely. What more do you want to see from Europe now that relations with the US seem more strained under a Trump administration?
I would like to see more concrete support to Ukraine at first place. At second place, Europe should help Ukraine to work together with the United States. And in general, Ukraine is part of Europe. We need to heal this transatlantic division, which is widening in our eyes, because that will make both Europe and United States weaker. I think it's not definitely what we can allow to happen.
Ukrainian MP Oleksii Goncharenko, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Iran has warned its ties with Turkey may degrade if Ankara continues to criticize Tehran's foreign policy. Iran's Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mahmoud Haidari, warned against the so-called false statements and unrealistic analysis that could lead to differences and also tensions. It comes after Turkey's foreign minister said Iran risks plunging the Middle East into disorder. Kim Jong-un's sister has accused the US of stepping up provocations against North Korea. Slamming the Trump administration, Kim Yo-young said the US has stepped up the political and military incitement against the Hermit Kingdom. The latest denunciation comes as US aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson visits South Korea. A newly elected member of the UK's Parliament has publicly objected to the government's proposed farm tax. Labour MP Henry Tufnell believes the levy would penalise small farms and not just wealthy landowners. It comes as farmers gather in central London to protest those changes. So far, the country's Prime Minister Keir Starmer and also his Chancellor Rachel Reeves are standing firm on this implementation. And finally, a lifestyle series starring the Duchess of Sussex is now available on Netflix. With Love, Meghan follows a former actress at home and shares cooking, gardening and also hosting tips. The show is part of a $100 million deal with the streaming site. It was originally due to premiere in January, but wildfires in LA delayed its release. Now to more on our top story, and President Zelenskyy says he's ready to sign the US minerals deal. I'm happy to say I'm joined by retired US Army Brigadier General and former US Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, Mark Kimmitt, who joins us now from Washington. Mark, in the last hours, Zelenskyy has posted on social media. We just heard from a Ukrainian MP who says this was a good move. It was the right thing to do. Do you agree, or was Zelenskyy just pushed into a corner by the Trump administration?
Well, I think it's both. If he was pushed into a corner, which caused him to relent on the mineral deal, the outcome of this is that we're moving towards peace negotiations, which is good for all concerned.
Trump's actions of pausing aid to Ukraine really appears drastic, but do you think Trump is using these kind of actions as a negotiating tool to really get these peace talks up and running as he wants?
I certainly do think that's what he's doing. That is certainly his style. All you have to do is look at that absurd proposal that he takes over Gaza and turns it into a resort and evicts all of the Palestinians to realize this is the way he negotiates. He comes up with ridiculous and outlandish proposals, which cause people to say, well, if that's his proposal, I need to come up with a better proposal. And so I think we're seeing the way he negotiates, and it's achieving the outcome, which is a mineral deal and President Zelenskyy coming to talks without any security guarantees.
Trump's previously said he could end the Russia-Ukraine war in just one day. We know he said that. Do you think he saw the row that kicked off in the Oval Office with Zelenskyy last week as a defeat or an embarrassment?
No. First, I think the media misunderstands how President Trump articulates himself. You can either take him literally or you can take him seriously. So since he may have said, I'll get it over in one day, but everybody knows that that's absurd. But the fact remains is he is bringing peace to Ukraine. Now, he's doing it in an odd style, in a transactional style, in a way that's very characteristic of the way that real estate magnates operate inside of New York City. So I think he's having fun with the media. The most important thing is in the background, while the media is falling all over itself to figure out what's going on, he's actually making progress.
I must say, we are finding it pretty difficult to keep up, us journalists, with all of the antics that are going on. Trump might think it's fun. We think it's slightly stressful. But in all of this, what you were just talking about there, Trump seems to have kind of sided with Russia in many people's eyes. Is this a wrong step for Donald Trump?
Well, again, I think it goes to whose eyes are you talking about? The people that are taking his words literally, which is the wrong thing to do, or seriously. Certainly what he's trying to do is he's trying to bring peace. And if that means he's got to work with both sides to do it, well, good on him. Now, please understand, I'm not a MAGA Republican. I'm a center moderate. Some people would say rhino. But I think I can understand what he is trying to do. And I don't think he's trying to favor one side or the other. He's just trying to get both sides to negotiate. And if he doesn't like the way the Russians are demanding too much, he'll walk away from the table.
And I just want to talk about, as the relationship between the US and Ukraine has felt really unsteady, we're now hearing that Russia could possibly help the US with diplomatic talks with Iran. Has this all been happening behind the scenes? Have Russia and the US been talking more than we think?
Well, I think so. I mean, just because President Trump is not talking to Putin about these issues, we've got a State Department, we've got a Department of Defense, we have a Department of National Intelligence. Those people are clearly reaching out and discussing separate issues with the Russians that may have nothing to do with Ukraine. But when it gets to the level of President Putin and President Trump, that's where it all blends together. But if we don't have people talking to Russia about issues such as Iran, that's professional misconduct and malpractice in my mind.
Trump's actually expected to speak in Congress tonight, delivering his first major speech to the nation. How do you think it will go in light of the latest statement from Zelenskyy? Do you think he'll put a positive spin on finding peace in Ukraine and Russia? Because we know this is something he wants to be seen as the peace man.
Well, what I'd say, this is not his first State of the Union address. It's his fourth. He did 4 in his last term. And characteristically, he does come in. He speaks to the nation. I think for the most part, he will, like every president, put a positive spin on what he is doing or what his administration is achieving. Now, there may be a little more bellicose, and there may be a little bit of, let's say, not entirely factual, but at the end of the day, America wants to hear what's going on, and who better to hear it from than President Trump?
Mark Kimmitt, retired U.S. Army Brigadier General and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. Your insights were fascinating. I appreciate you joining me. Thank you. Now, earlier today, European leaders had doubled down on their support for Ukraine following Trump's announcement that the US would suspend military aid to Kyiv. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said Europe is ready to step up, whilst announcing a 5-part plan to bolster Europe's defence industry. She also said we are living in the most momentous and dangerous of times. For more on this, I'm happy to say I'm joined by our correspondent, William Denselow, who is in Brussels for us. William, a lot's happening quickly. European leaders surely will be slightly relieved following the statement from Zelenskyy, and also reports that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has had a phone call with him.
It certainly is. The message from European officials, including Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, is that Europe's support for Ukraine was unwavering, but there were certainly major hopes here in Brussels and across Europe that the United States would continue to back Kyiv. Of course, we've heard from the UK in their proposals for things like a peacekeeping force to potentially be deployed for Ukraine, and their assertion was that they very much wanted Washington to provide some kind of backup support to that. So this will certainly be of huge importance for Europe, because major questions have been asked here and were asked by the press a little earlier to Commission spokespeople. And the big question being asked was, yes, the European Union has unveiled this proposal that would see defence capabilities, defence spending ramped up to the tune of roughly 800 billion euros. But the big question, would that be enough to offset and to make up for any potential shortfalls should Washington continue with their policy of freezing military assistance to Ukraine? Big question marks about whether that would indeed be the case.
The last 24 hours or so have really highlighted how Europe have supported Zelenskyy. He'll need this to continue as he goes into negotiations with Donald Trump. Do you think that he will have that concrete support behind him?
Well, as far as the US and EU relationship is concerned, and wider Europe for that matter, the United States has long insisted that Europe is not doing its fair share when it comes to either support for Ukraine or support for the wider European security. So it's not just Ukraine that will be pleased by these latest comments from the European Commission when it comes to defence spending and boosting defence capabilities. It'll also be very welcome news for the Trump administration. The hope is that that will help galvanise President Trump to continue with their support for Kyiv, knowing that Europe is taking its obligations seriously. There is a major summit expected here in Brussels on Thursday of European leaders of the EU's member states, where not just the issue of more defence spending will be discussed, but also how to provide more immediate support for Ukraine on the battlefield. Also, these other proposals that have been touted, things like this potential peace plan, how to also possibly use frozen Russian assets. So the message here in Brussels is that Europe is taking action. The hope is that President Trump and the Trump administration is taking notice.
The US Vice President J.D. Vance has also sparked a row over comments he made about the potential involvement of international forces to police a peace deal in Ukraine. Tell us more, William.
Absolutely. J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, saying a US stake in Ukraine's economy. There, a reference to the potential mineral deal between the US and Ukraine would be better than, as he put it, security of 20,000 troops from a, quote, random country. Considering the fact that the UK and France have been the ones touting sending peacekeepers to Ukraine, that has drawn the ire of many politicians in the UK and France, thinking that J.D. Vance was making a clear reference to them. J.D. Vance also said that those countries that he described as random hadn't been in a fight for 30 to 40 years. So many thinking that would be a slap in the face, considering the fact that the UK and France have stood by the United States in plenty of conflicts during the last 4 decades. J.D. Vance, though, has come out and said he was not making any reference to any particular country, particularly that of the UK or France.
William Denselow in Brussels, thank you for being across all of that for us today. Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has said he's traveling to the United States. The far-right minister is a supporter of annexing the occupied West Bank, a topic expected to be discussed by President Donald Trump. Writing on X, Smotrich said the goal of the visit was to strengthen the economic cooperation between Israel and the US. The trip comes as leaders meet at the Arab League summit in Cairo today to counteract Trump's Gaza proposal. Now, Pope Francis is said to be resting today after suffering from 2 new episodes of acute respiratory failure on Monday. The pontiff required mechanical ventilation to help him breathe as doctors performed 2 bronchoscopes. The 88-year-old has chronic lung disease and had part of his lung removed as a young man. At least 31 people are dead after a truck collided with a bus in southern Bolivia. Authorities said the bus rolled some 500 meters down a ravine on the highway between Oruro and Potosi. The driver of the truck has been arrested as police investigate the incident. The accident comes 2 days after another deadly crash in the region where 37 people were killed. And Cole Dean, Dolly Parton's husband of 60 years, has died in Nashville. The two married in a secret ceremony when the country music singer was just 20 years old. In a statement, Parton said, "Words can't do justice to the love we shared for over 60 years. Thank you for your prayers and sympathy." In the last hour, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said there's no justification for the US to impose tariffs on Canada. Whilst addressing Trump, he said Canada will take measures to prevent predatory behaviour and that this is a very dumb thing to do. It comes as President Trump's 25% tariffs for Mexico and Canada come into force today, with an additional 10% on Chinese goods. We can now speak to economist Vicky Pryce. Vicky, thank you for joining me. So Trump's trade war sequel appears to actually be in full swing. Do tariffs carry higher economic risks now than they did in Trump's first term?
Well, they do, because, of course, they weren't really expected to this extent. Just a month ago, the tariffs that were announced were going to be imposed against Canada and Mexico were suspended by a whole month. And the expectation, therefore, was that once both Mexico and Canada did various things which Trump expected them to do, like police the border better, particularly between Mexico and the US, and also ensure that it wasn't the drug trafficking that he was worried about. Lots of drugs do come through the two borders, and in fact, Canada was immediately able to put more forces in its borders as well. That perhaps that would be forgotten, but it wasn't. And those tariffs have now been imposed, and it's a serious problem for everybody because, of course, you know, but particularly with Canada retaliating and Mexico intending to do so as well, what we're going to see is that costs go up, prices go up everywhere, and trade is disrupted. I mean, we've got to bear in mind that when you look, for example, at the car industry in North America, what you have is almost 50%, if possibly more, depending on which particular production line you look at, of the car industry in the US depends on imports of parts coming from either Mexico or Canada. So that's a serious problem for the industry as a whole. And of course, the US also depends quite considerably on oil coming from Canada. So that's going to also become more expensive. And that's a serious problem in terms of growth. We've already seen manufacturing production stagnating a bit in the US. We've seen confidence dropping, consumer confidence dropping, expectations for inflation going up. So all that is a real worry. So it's a no-win situation for anyone involved.
Yes, indeed. And Vicky, we do know that part of the reason Donald Trump had a second term was really on the economy and helping those people who voted for him. That is what they wanted. But they're really going to be hit by these tariffs, aren't they? The consumers are going to be feeling them. So what do you think is going to come down the pipeline? Do you think that Trump is actually just using this as another scare tactic, or how are people going to react? And the markets in the future?
Well, you're absolutely right about the promises he had made during his campaign, which is to preserve American jobs. And he thinks he's doing it by imposing those tariffs. I mean, he keeps saying that foreign countries are stealing the jobs of Americans and really treating the American economy badly and so on, which, of course, you could argue from a protectionist perspective, but we all know that in truth, an open economy is the one that does considerably better than a closed one. And at the end of the day, the cost of the consumer could be quite significant. What we were also seeing is that companies are reacting, and the stock market is reacting to this. I mean, for companies, we can see quite clearly that they're going to be very concerned about investing in the future because there is all this uncertainty. One moment there were tariffs, then perhaps they're not going to be any, and then suddenly they're reimposed, and who knows what's going to happen to wider areas where tariffs might be imposed, like, for example, in Europe. So there is going to be a lot of caution. And what we've seen, in fact, is the markets reacting very negatively to this. And money has moved out of the stock market into treasury bonds, treasuries, US treasuries, so basically government bonds, because they think that's going to be a little bit more secure than leaving money in the stock market. So that's not going to be particularly good for the financial sector either, pensions and so on, in terms of what happens next in the US economy. So at the end of the day, the consumer will suffer because businesses will suffer, and they're going to have to pass some of that cost on to the consumers, and it's the consumer who's going to have to pay.
Absolutely. The term Trump session has been used often with fears of increased costs, as you've just been telling me, for American people, when inflation is actually already above the Fed's target. What will this mean for borrowing costs going forward?
Well, that's a very interesting question because, yes, inflation had gone up to 3%, but not, yes, 1% above the target. A little while ago, we would have considered that to be actually quite good, given the very high inflation rates we had seen after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the energy prices really, going through the roof. They've come down quite significantly now. Now, there are two possibilities here. One is because of those falling bond yields now, because everyone is piling into treasuries. And of course, yields are coming down as a result, that we may be moving towards a slightly lower interest rate environment. Mortgage rates and so on are very much tied to that. So perhaps that's going to ease the path a little bit for the population. On the other hand, the Federal Reserve is going to be very concerned about the inflation expectations of everything we've just been talking about, tariffs.
Vicky, Vicky, sorry, we appear to be having some technical problems with Vicky there. Hopefully, we'll be able to bring economist Vicky Pryce back. But if she can hear me, thank you, Vicky, for joining me. Let's take a look at the top business news now. Mercedes-Benz has won an agreement from its Works Council to offer buyouts to staff and reduce planned salary increases by half as part of a wider cost-cutting drive. The company has declined to say how many jobs will be cut, but said workers in production would not be affected and that redundancies had been ruled out. Management has agreed to extend a job security guarantee until the end of 2034 as the company battles to revive earnings. Now, an acquisition of Versace by Italian luxury group Prada would create a company with a broader base that is more resistant to business cycles. However, reviving the fashion company Versace, which is operating at a loss, could take years and hit short-term profits. Prada is seeking to expand after posting strong organic sales growth in the last 9 months of 2024, despite a slowdown in demand. A merger would be Italy's answer to the French conglomerates that do dominate the luxury space. Turning to sports news now, Mercedes Formula One rookie driver Andrea Kimi Antoni has rejected the idea that he is a replacement for Lewis Hamilton. The 18-year-old's promotion is a consequence of Hamilton's decision to leave Mercedes, which did force the hand of the team principal Toto Wolff. Antonelli joined Mercedes' youth program at 11 years old before progressing to Formula One. And Brazil forward Vinicius Jr. says he is happy at Real Madrid and wants to renew his contract with the La Liga club as soon as possible. His latest comments are playing down reports of interest from other leagues. Vinicius, who joined Real in 2018, has won the Spanish top flight league 3 times with the club. Now, a reminder of today's top stories. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he's ready to work under Trump's strong leadership and sign a minerals deal after the US suspends military aid to Kyiv. Europe says it's ready to step up as it presents an €800 billion plan to rearm and boost defense spending. And stock markets tumble as fresh American tariffs fuel trade war fears. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says this is a very dumb thing to do. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. The Dressing Room is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burgess Watson with G&T. Good night and thank you for joining us.